So, to follow up on my last video about communism, I think it's only fair that I tackle capitalism and how it has its own major issues. And it's not a perfect system. It's better than communism as a whole, but rampant capitalism, unrestricted, unregulated capitalism, is just downright awful. People are expected to slave away at jobs for decades of their lives, scrambling to put together what little savings they can, with many people barely able to afford to live and let alone enjoy life. The classic view of life being a rat race fits nothing better than capitalism. People shouldn't have to spend their whole lives struggling to climb our social hierarchy. The onset of social media, the vast inequalities that capitalism creates, have become far more apparent, with the common person being able to view the lives of the 1%, being able to see the differences in how life is lived, without a doubt negatively impacts the vast majority of society. Even the relatively small difference from being in the top 10% in society and the top 1% is astronomical, with the top 10% being able to live comfortable lives, but still having to work frequently and making sure that they're not being foolish with their money, while the top 1% can do whatever they like with their money. They have no concerns. They can live as they please. Being able to see these differences will do nothing but create a greater class divide and make many miserable when they realize that such a life is just practically unattainable for the vast majority of people. It also feeds into my biggest issue with capitalism, that is the vapid consumerist life that is shoved upon people almost 24/7 due to ads being nearly everywhere in the current day. People are expected to just buy. And such frequent spending is just unrealistic for most people, and yet it is encouraged, and most people still buy into the system. Oh, the new Apple product just dropped? Well, why don't you own it yet? Are you too poor to afford it? People grow this desire to be seen in a positive light, even if they aren't truly happy. They typically won't show the issues that they are struggling with on things like social media unless they have a lot to gain from doing so. Capitalist societies are built on this general fakeness, this urge to consume the most expensive brands as soon as possible, because those who can't, those who don't, are seen as irrelevant, unimportant, poor, and in a capitalist society, no one wants to be seen as poor. This rather disgusting, shallow view on life, it ruins holidays for me, as people are expected and pressured into taking part of this empty, consumer-styled life. Nothing serves as a better example of my issue here than Santa and Christmas as a whole. People are expected by society to spend as much as possible to outdo their friends and families in the game of spoiling each other with the nicest gifts possible. Nice in theory, but it is incredibly off-putting to me. Gifts shouldn't be expensive and fancy. They should be meaningful, thoughtful, caring. The classic image of Fat Santa in red and white is simply due to a hugely successful marketing ad from the 1900s for Coke. The icon of Christmas for non-religious people is literally just a capitalistic creation created purely to push product. This just screams how hollow a capitalist society can be, because there is no meaning behind this holiday in the capitalist view, aside from being an excellent chance to sell a bunch of products to mindless consumers. Black Friday, as well, is perfectly timed just before Christmas so that the rabid masses can fight over a half-off TV alongside countless other products in order to get fancy, expensive gifts for much less money. Holidays, in reality, should be a chance to take a breath, relax, and enjoy life. Escape that rat race for a week or two. corrupting it into a time of intense shopping and indulging in the most extreme of consumers' tendencies is just one of the horrific realities of capitalism. I couldn't care less if someone got me a super fancy gift. Sure, I wouldn't complain, but I'd rather just take the time to enjoy the company of friends and families rather than expecting them to blow all of their savings on me. I would not want them expecting me to do the same either. And if I was to, it would be simply because I wanted to spoil them with something nice and thought of a great gift for them, rather than deciding that, oh, I should spend several $100s on some random product because it's expensive and they might like it. Personal issues aside, there are many more pressing issues that matter on a global scale. Climate change has been a hotly debated topic for the past 30 years or so, with the vast majority of the scientific community agreeing that it is a major issue. Now, even if someone seriously believes that climate change is, in fact, made up nonsense, the issue of handling waste is indisputable. Trash quickly piles up at landfills, and third world countries have largely been swamped with trash. Microplastics are unavoidable at this point. They're literally everywhere, with potential health issues that we don't even know of yet. They are in all unfiltered water sources, in our rain, in our oceans. Plastic is so heavily used in everyday life that cutting out all plastic is simply unfeasible at this point. Plastic is cheap, easy to produce, and thus it has been widely used by capitalist corporations, quickly polluting the world. Cheap plastic products are mass-produced and then sold to the masses for a great profit. Don't even get me started on Funko Pops. Now, these are greatly pushed upon consumers by advertising, and most of them are likely to be thrown away within a few short years, further contributing to our growing trash issue. The climate change issue has been denied by plenty throughout the past 30 years, but looking at this year's insane heat wave in China proves the problem. The heat they've been experiencing is unprecedented, with the length and severity of the heat being completely unmatched in our history of tracking weather. During this heat wave, the vast majority of their rivers either dried up completely or nearly completely, and the heat was persisting throughout the night with only slight declines during the night. I find it rather fitting that the country that has been the world's factory in terms of producing plastic products and other products is suffering the consequences of such heavy production and pollution. China is far above all other countries in the amount of pollution it puts out each year, and in some senses that is totally reasonable given that it produces majority of the world's products. However, I'm hoping that the heat wave they experienced will shock them and the rest of the world into becoming more modern with our means of producing products. Without a firm change away from heavily polluting factories and a push to more modern methods of energy production and material production, China will continue to suffer and the rest of the world will suffer as well. Now, China is obviously not solely to blame for their insane levels of pollution. Someone, somewhere, had to make all the various products that we use in everyday life, and the vast majority does come from China. If there was not such a high demand for pointless products that are used and disposed of insanely quickly, China wouldn't be pumping out as much products and thus not pumping out quite as much pollution. Capitalism is largely to blame for this, creating frivolous items that often have no use, being promoted endlessly to mindless consumers. Change needs to happen, but in a heavily capitalistic society that benefits greatly by pumping out this pointless trash, change isn't very likely. Now, I mentioned earlier that capitalism leads to rather hollow and empty traditions like Christmas and other holidays, but it also leads to a lack of meaning in general everyday life for people. Living life simply to consume entertainment and plastic products like Funko Pops is not natural for humanity. Capitalism and consumerism as a whole arguably drew more and more people away from forms of religion, and while to some extent I can believe this is a good thing, the meaning that religion once provided to people is gone, and there is nothing substantial to replace it. Religious institutions have plenty of issues, everyone knows this, but the beliefs and morals they promote can be incredibly beneficial to people. Certainly, people shouldn't be rushing out to become religious just to fill their emptiness, because doing so is arguably just as vacuous as participating in capitalism. This can all be simplified down to the statement that money can't buy happiness, or any other variation on that statement. The richest people can be the most hollow and depressed. If one is chasing money for the sake of chasing money, life will become more and more meaningless the more they succeed in that pursuit. That's not to say money isn't important, as it certainly is in capitalist societies, especially in order to live comfortably, but people should be careful not to fall into the trappings of capitalism. Many will simply live in anticipation of the next big movie, game, or sports event. When one is living only to consume, can they truly be considered alive? There is no simple fix to this void of meaning that capitalism has created and perpetuated throughout the last century, especially since the solution will be different for everyone. Some people may find their meaning through religion and escape the emptiness of capitalism that way. Others will find their meaning through using their natural talents and endlessly pursuing perfection in things like sports or art. I personally find a great deal of meaning in my life simply by just enjoying the presence of my friends from time to time, or by enjoying nature. And I also hope that this little venture into YouTube shall provide some meaning as well. All in all, capitalism is downright terrible for the majority of humanity. That being said, it still beats communism by a mile, along with most other ways that humanity has structured itself in the past. Luckily, the way current society is run isn't as strictly capitalist, or things would be worse than they already are, but there are still a lot of tweaks and improvements that need to be done to improve the lives of the majority of people. Not only do improvements need to be made, but people also need to adapt to the changes in society, as the past century has seen the most rapid changes in human society ever, and humans can only adapt so quickly. Now, many will say that communism is so much better due to the ideals that it proposes. However, such ideals don't fit human nature. Capitalism fits human nature incredibly well, and it is a lot easier to implement because of how well it fits. Not only does it fit human nature better, but it also does not hamper people's freedom in the same way that communism does. Instead of being locked down to serve society, people are instead locked down to work until they can afford to have some semblance of freedom. Not much better, but it's still better than no freedom at all. You just have to work a lot to earn it. Capitalism promotes a sense of individuality, and that is something that I can certainly appreciate and support. However, I think it tends to promote individuality a little too strongly. While communism is entirely about serving one's community or one's nation, capitalism is entirely about serving one's own interests. Due to both capitalism and communism laying on the extreme ends of how things can be run, I find them both incredibly cringe, as extremes in beliefs tend to be.